All right. I think I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. So the September 7th, 2017 Academic Distress Commission meeting can be called to order. Can we do the roll call?
Mr. Coffin?
Present.
Mr. Monteleone?
Present.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Present.
And Dr. Solis?
Present.
All right. The first agenda item is the beginning of the school year update. Dr. Graham.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. And actually, first of all, I'd like to make a statement. Last time I was asked to come to the podium, and I asked Dr. Sturgill to do it. I was asked by a few people if I was making a statement. I can assure you I was not. What we're trying to do is behave in the same way we behaved at the last commission, which is the people in central office who have the most direct contact with the information requested are the folks who come up. I can assure you if I wanted to make a statement, I'm much more candid than that. But what I'm trying to do is be respectful to people and not speak just for the sake of speaking. But in that same spirit, we understand this is a formal meeting and a proper decorum is appreciated. Although the person at the podium is speaking, if clarification is needed or if we need to add, so people will stand up and kind of chip in. So again, the goal is to get you the information you request. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Assistant Superintendent Nick Becerra.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. I don't think I need a microphone. Being a former high school student, I think I can use my administrator voice if I need to. I was asked to give reflections on the first day of school, and actually 3 questions that Mr. Hardy gave us, which were really good, were, hey, what went well, what were the hiccups, and what needs to be followed up since then. And so what went well, students were in classes, halls were clear, teachers were teaching. It was amazing, and many of our visits and almost all the administrative staff at central office were assigned to buildings. We visited all the buildings the first day of school, and it was just amazing. It really seemed like we were in school for over a week. I mean, it just was, let's go, go, go. The new bell schedule at the high school went off without a hitch. We actually added 10 minutes, 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after. That went well, switched with pickup and with parents. It was very smooth. Students were happy and back to school, and if you've ever been in a school building, first day of school, you see a lot of hugs. A lot of students are hugging their teachers, kids are high-fiving each other because they haven't seen each other throughout the summer. Several school building principals stated that it was one of the best starts they've ever had to a school year. We had comments as great start, smooth start, best start, smooth opening. Structural resources, which a lot of times we don't think about until we get that call saying we don't have them. They were ready to go. And I really want to highlight and kudos to Kim Cooper and Sabine from our warehouse. They are the ones who really order our supplies and our resources. And it was amazing. We had everything ready to go. It was at a point where in the summer, some of us at Central Office we were the delivery boys. And so I was delivering stuff to Mr. Coffin's classroom, Carol Lee's classroom, and so it went really well. And then registration received kudos from many buildings with getting kids into Power School. So when kids showed up, they were there, ready to go. They had very minimal disruption. So for our buildings to reach out and really let us know, hey, kudos to our registration department. What were some of the hiccups? Well, it's always the first day of school, so we got to find what we need to address. It was a hiccup, but it was just really an amazing number. We had almost 150 students register at the high school the last couple of weeks. And so when you say 150, that is over a teacher caseload. So when you're thinking 150 students, our counselors want to meet with them, build a schedule, and so 150 with 4 high school counselors, it just was really a challenge, but they got it done. But it was just really interesting to see that we had an additional 150 come in and register. Titan Academy, for many of you who are not aware of Titan Academy, we are doing basically a teaming concept at freshmen. So students have wraparound services, they build better relationships. We are busting at the seams. Kids are coming. And so right now we have over 650 freshmen. So we're watching the numbers. I will tell you, I think it's resonated with the community because we've had certain personnel step up and say, hey, we want to donate money to the Titan Academy for incentives, things like that. So it's a really Great process, but we're really watching, and I'll probably be speaking with Mr. Hardy and Dr. Graham to say, hey, we got to watch those numbers. Preschool registration, to be honest, was not as smooth as it could have been, but I will tell you that Lorain already has a plan to address that, and so that will be a follow-up. Technology, we had some glitches first day of school. Some of the resources and downloadable programs that were on teachers' desktops were either not working or were removed. And so we're working to get those back. But also a part of it is the technology department, we were down personnel, and so we're in the process now to hire. We just had a recent resignation of Michelle. So she was a really good worker. And then our new copiers. And so if anyone has used our copier in our district, the great concept is if you go to print, you can go to any building in the district and use your ID, scan it, and you can print. So if I was in a meeting and I had something I printed from central office, I could go to this printer, print off, and give it to anyone. It's a really neat concept. It's just kind of it was a slow learning process for our staff because they had to have their ID. Sometimes there was a lag if there were a lot of copying projects in the queue, so it just was just a little frustration. So that was one of the hiccups. What needs to be followed up with? We do have classrooms that don't have phones yet, and so for us, we want to make sure we have that so teachers can either take calls, make calls home, or even reach out to the main office. Technology issues, we are addressing those. Brett Kluber is aware. We have discussions with Jeff Hawks, and we are in the process of doing hires to help that department. We are continuing to monitor, once again, the numbers at Titan Academy. Preschool, like I said, Doreen is really, she has a meeting with the preschool supervisor, registration personnel, and select preschool staff to determine exactly what need to be changed and revised to make it a better process. And she already has a plan because she's talked to several of us. And then a positive about preschool. So I don't want any of you to walk away thinking preschool is a negative. It is a positive because we are almost at capacity for our preschool program. So that is a great positive. So I wanted to keep it short. Go ahead, Hattie.
Could I ask total enrollment right now for the district?
Sure, it is around 65-50, roughly around. Yeah.
And that's up from last year.
It's a few short from last year.
Okay.
And right now, we're just kind of waiting because some of our families don't start school until after Labor Day. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get another rush of students coming in.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, I cannot leave this podium without saying this. Go Titans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mick.
All right. Our next agenda item is a district update on community engagement. Mr. Hardy?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Academic Distress Committee. Thank you, Dr. Graham and Mick, for that presentation. Really appreciate it. I want to start off, and as I prepare for these type of presentations, I usually have an opener and how I want to open our conversation. And it's happenstance that I have a different opening that I had practiced because of my arrival here this morning. I shared with the the executive leadership team earlier today. My flight was intended to be here by 9:30 a.m. this morning, leaving St. Louis at 5 a.m. and stop in Chicago was a little bit more eventful than I needed it to be. So in Chicago, leaving for Cleveland, about halfway up on our flight stewardess is running like Usain Bolt down the aisle of our plane. And usually you don't see that on a plane too often, and so we're wondering what's going on. She goes to the back and she's checking something in the lavatory, and apparently there was a smoke alarm or something like that went off in our plane. So 20 minutes in the air, she's frantic in the back. There are people starting to panic on our plane, and it brought a lot of light to where my mind was and where we were, and just really concerned about everyone here, concerned about my two boys and my wife. Luckily, they found that something was tripped in the system, but for precautionary reasons, they decided to turn around, and so we went back to Chicago. We landed in Chicago, and there were multiple fire engines and emergency cars, so it was more than just a precaution. I say all that to say what was missing in that event, other than safety in my mind, was the fact that there was a lack of transparency. At some point, I wanted someone to come over the intercom and explain to us what was going on, to give us a little bit of peace of mind, because there was a level of fear that had risen to a life or death situation for many people that were on this flight. So I say all that to say this is an effort today and going forward on these meetings that we have scheduled to be transparent around where we are and where we're not and what we need to do to go forward. So in tonight's presentation, you will see, as outlined by previous dates, that we are meeting on a regular basis about 30 days in. We had scheduled this, or had this in our last presentation, that we would meet today to give that 30-day update. And the purpose of this update is truly an update. It is not a final report. It is not going to be completely comprehensive. There are a number of things that will be mentioned in this report that will shift, that will change, because as we get more information, as we meet with more community members, we get more information, and we're gonna change our course as necessary. So know that this is still a draft. By the 22nd of October, we want to bring a draft of our academic improvement plan to the Academic Distress Committee for them to review, give me feedback, so that we can go forward and make final adjustments to that by November 6th, so that we can get a final thumbs up and move forward with our plan. So just wanted to revisit the timeline and know again that this is purely an update. Three things that I've embarked on with the partnership of our friends from TNTP. Obviously, first and foremost, engaging the community, and I'll speak to the numbers in which we've engaged with at this point. Second, get into a deep review of where we are academically and what our challenges are. And third, to get to a place of understanding our school culture and deepening our understanding of what we need to go forward. This is the cycle that was presented before around how we're going to go about this. As you can see highlighted in the blue box, we're in the listening and learning phase, but shortly thereafter will be the take action phase. So know that some of the things that I will mention today will lead to potential actions, and I will tonight just speak very transparently on some of those actions that might be taken, but again, still this is a draft of where we are and not exhaustive in our plan. So to this date, here are the numbers as far as people that we have spoken with, groups that we have touched base with, and number of one-on-one meetings that have taken place. Many of you have been part of those conversations that are in this room, so thank you for being a part of those conversations. That information will only make us more prepared for where we're going forward. And we look to make sure these numbers not only go up, but more importantly, get the information we need to move forward. So you see upwards of 892 touch points with members of the community, 18 focus groups, 52 additional one-on-one conversations that were held. And at this point, the community has responded to upwards of 635 surveys. We also have an additional round of surveys that will be coming out to our central office, so that number will also increase. So after 30 days, and honestly, 30 days is generous given a lot of the work actually didn't start until middle of August or the beginning part of August, so it's actually less than 30 days. The work that has been done, led by a lot of the folks within our office and with TNTP, has been tremendous. So I thank all that have been a part of this. And this is, again, the breakdown of who we've spoken to this point. We have spoken to members of the school board. About 3 weeks ago, I met with each member of the school board for about an hour just to talk about who they were and what their concerns were. We were planning to have a meeting today at lunch. Unfortunately, my flight decided to go back to Chicago for a bit. So we could not have that meeting today, but it is my intent to reach out to them again, find another time for us to connect to get more on the same page. And this leads to our central office through our community, and many of our students have engaged in conversations. We are looking to continue conversations with more members of the community, some of which we haven't touched base with, and some that we just want to go back and get more information from. So there are three big trends that are coming from what we're hearing, or what I'm hearing at this point, that lead to some questions. And at the end of this part, I will be very clear on what I'm hearing and what actions potentially I will be taking based on some of the trends that are coming up. The 6 areas you see on the left-hand side are aligned to the 6 areas in my entry plan. You will see in the next week or so that entry plan will also start to see, you'll see some checks next to things that have been completed as things have we have now moved past those phases of engagement, but you'll see some high-level trends, and I won't speak to this slide. This will also be posted online so you can see it more deeply, but there are a few things that jumped out to me right away. Obviously, performance of our students is always my number one concern, and I've spoken to that in the past, where again only 2.5% received a mediation-free score in high school. That's a big concern. The second piece that jumped out to me, and this has come from the focus groups and some indicators from our surveys, which have been tremendously helpful and insightful, is that there is a level of trust or distrust within the organization that is very high. I underscore that because without trust, we can't build much else, right? If you've read anything of Patrick Lencioni, he speaks of the importance of trust being the foundation, and the fact that this is something that has been a common thread, not only from our teachers, but all the way up through our central office. This is a concern because it speaks to what we need to do within our office, within the central office administrative building, to increase the amount of trust that we see. The third, of course, is the community. The community is very passionate around the work that is needed to be done here to support Lorain, but need a little bit more of alignment of how we're approaching that and how we're looking at that. And so those are the three bigger things that jump out to me around what we need to do going forward. With that said, the first trend, of course, is coming from that community. And again, there's a direct quote from the community there that speaks to the importance of our parents. There are many families and parents who feel that they are not being respected to the degree that they need to be and deserve to be as leaders of their households and the fathers and mothers and grandmothers of their children. And it's important that we find a better way to reach them. One quote that I stumbled across as going through some of the surveys spoke to a parent who felt very concerned when entering a building how she was treated, and that she did not want to she didn't want to go back to that school building because the way that she was treated. So those type of sentiments were coming through the survey, all of which we will address and deal with as we think about building better partnerships with our community. Secondly, an equity vision for our students. So what does it mean? What will it mean for all of us to come together to reach all of the needs of our kids? The quote there, again, is a direct quote from a survey. The capital letters were written by the author of that quote, but most importantly underlines the fact that we need to work together to do what is best for kids. And if this person is seeing this challenge within the central office, this is probably something that's seen by a number of people within the central office, which means we just have to do a deeper dive into what that means. And I'll speak a little bit more about that a little bit later. So the combination of teacher and school leader turnover, the conversations of parents and teachers having struggles with discipline, all the way up to the central office and some of the challenges that are being experienced by folks who interact with the central office are all concerning, but more importantly will be addressed. And lastly, speaks to the central office support to schools. Communication has come up many different ways from folks in the field and from the central office on how we need to communicate better with our teachers and leaders in every one of our buildings, and that means how we also support them. So without getting into specifics at this point, because again, this is still a draft of information, I want to make sure I have a complete understanding of what the challenges are around communication, but I can anticipate some notions of the things that schools need are not always what they receive, and those supports need to be more aligned, more intentional, and create a greater impact. So the three questions that this raised for me going forward are of course the ones that are keeping me up at night. Are what are the barriers that we have, and what can we do to remove those barriers? What do we need to remove those barriers and to create that deeper investment? What is it that we need to do, and how we need to connect with our community to make that feel like a stronger partnership and make it a real partnership? The second question being, how can we improve our culture? And what I mean by culture, I want to be very particular around what I mean by culture, is within this organization, the way that we do things, the way that we operate, the way that we communicate, the way that we get the work done for our kids and for our schools. Make sure that's intentional, make sure that it's clear, and make sure it's done in a positive way so that our kids understand the importance and appreciate the work that's being done. Case in point. I have a wonderful 3-year-old son sitting at home right now. And I know for a fact he's going to his mother asking for a popsicle before his fish sticks. But he knows if dad is home, he would not ask that question for a popsicle before fish sticks. But because of the culture that my wife and I have, we have a loop of conversation. We have an understanding of what he's about to do. We have a way we operate around this system. We ensure that the fish sticks come first. So I say that because here's an opportunity for us as an organization, as a culture, to come together and center around a vision, around a direction that we all buy into systematically to create the change necessary, so that when we're pushed and when there are challenges and when people come to us and try to break us apart, we stay strong together. And it's important that we build that culture if we're ever going to make that impact we want to see for all of our kids. And lastly, this has been something that I'll harp on a little bit longer. How are we allocating our resources, and are we allocating our resources appropriately to create positive outcomes for our kids? I had a conversation with our treasurer and folks from the state and additional auditors who will be doing a compliance audit. And nonetheless, in that process, they will go through many different things. However, that will give us, from a compliance standpoint, are we doing right or wrong? What it won't tell us is how we're using the money appropriately, if we're using the money appropriately. Case in point, if we buy 10,000 pencils, are those 10,000 pencils getting to 10,000 kids, or are those 10,000 pencils getting to 2? There's a big difference, right? And so it's important to really analyze, where is the money going? Who is it impacting? And who do we need to shift the money towards to create greater impact? There are things that have been brought to my attention that have forced me to think a little bit deeper around this area, to be completely transparent. I won't go into those details right now, but know that because of what I'm starting to see around how finances are being pushed around the district, not from a compliance standpoint, again, very compliant from my understanding, but from a performance standpoint, we will need to dig a little bit deeper on what is being used and how it's being used. And I'll speak to how I will approach that in a few minutes. So the next 60 days. So it brings us to this juncture of, again, slowly moving out of deep understanding phase and slowly towards taking action stage. TNTP is with us and will be with us for a little bit longer for 2 reasons, one of which they're contracted with us for the next 60 days, but I also have found, based on the things they're starting to see and hear, I'm going to need them a little bit longer, and I'm going to need them to support some of the work a little bit deeper through an insight survey. I've spoken with Tony Richardson, and actually I spoke to Ms. O'Brien as well, around the need to potentially fund the survey for us to get a deeper understanding, all of which will be coming out of the foundation money that we received to support this effort, so would not touch district dollars, but nonetheless will give us a deeper level of understanding of what is needed before we go forward. So that's one of the first big things we want to reinforce, that we need to go even a little bit further. I think before we move to action, I live by the saying of measure twice, cut once. So I need us to measure twice and completely understand what's going on. The second thing is I want to make sure before anything changes, if there are any changes, that I'm very clear on what those changes are and the timeline for those changes to take place. Right now, as anticipated, there are things that we're seeing, and there are things that that are concerning. And for that reason, I was intended to come in, as my entry plan indicated, to come in the first week of October. My plan is now to move up that entry date 2 weeks, in large part because there are things that are, for lack of a better phrase, concerning, and I need to address them. I called movers yesterday, made arrangements to move everything up, and I think we'll be here earlier in a way that we can support the efforts quicker. So I say that to say, here are the 4 the 4 areas in which I want to dive a little bit deeper. One of which is academics. Had a great conversation today around some academic pieces. Great work on pulling the data together from Bill Oley, and I really appreciate his efforts to getting those numbers, because there are some things that are sticking out about our performance that we need to address. And this is from pre-K all the way up to 12. And we just need to understand more before we can act, but knowing that there's some concerns there. Secondly, as I mentioned, the insight survey will give us more information of what is going on, get us to a place where we can really get at the culture of our organization and start to make that shift that is necessary. Human capital and the structures I mentioned. Human capital is one that as we look at the comments that are coming in around the disconnect between central office and schools and the communication gap that is existing, I need to understand what that gap is here in central office. Think about, how are we organized? Is there a need to look at the organization, look at how we're organized, to change functions of certain people or certain individuals? I need to know that. I need to get underneath the hood to really understand that. So know that I will be digging deeper in our organizational structure to see what is needed to make the correct turn towards action for us in our district. The fourth of which is our funding allocation. This is something that I've spoken to our treasurer about, and he wholeheartedly agrees that there is something that we could do to understand how funding is working or not, so that we can actually make the necessary changes for how we use our money within the district. At this point, I've already contacted a few different outside partners to potentially do some of that work, to do some of that deeper dive, if you will, in how our funds are allocated. I would go through the same process I went with TNTP, where I will contact multiple national experts in this area, post them online so people can see who I'm speaking to, the cost and all that good stuff before I make a selection. And then, of course, by the October 22nd meeting, I will have that update for all of who we're going with and who will support this effort. I do think this is critical for us to dive into, because there are, when you think about anything we do in a school district, cannot be done without money. And if we're not using the money appropriately, we need to figure out why and what we need to do about it as soon as possible. So I emphasize the funding, and I emphasize, again, the human capital. Of the two personally, just to be completely inside my head, that I am deeply looking at, our partners from TNTP are looking at the other two pieces, and we'll get that information so that we can proceed appropriately in the near future in creating our academic improvement plan. As I had mentioned, the key date is the 22nd will be the draft academic improvement plan. It will be available for all to see. Again, from a transparent standpoint, want everyone to be able to view it. I have spoken to the executive leadership team today. It will be made available to them so they can review and along the way have deep input on what goes into that plan. So there will be opportunities to go back and forth to make sure that it's a strong plan and it represents what we need to go forward. And then obviously the 11th will have the final plan presented and hopefully given the thumbs up to move forward from the ADC. I want to pause here for a second because I want to clarify some of the things that I've said. One of which, there are 4 areas that I had mentioned that I'm really honing in on. Again, human capital and organizational culture and structure are big, and then the finance piece. But what I want to say, given my experience on the plane today, to make sure there aren't any fear levels going up. This is not directly approaching anything that's happening at school. School leaders, teachers, continue doing the great work that you're doing. You all are the ones we are trying to get better for. But while we're getting better, we need you to continue doing the great work that you do. So know that a lot of these changes that we're talking about, for potential changes we're talking about for schools, will not directly impact the classroom in the 17-18 school year. A lot of the things that will be presented and proposed for this year will be some of the organizational pieces that we need to find out and figure out here at central office in the administrative building. So schools, please know that this is in preparation for supporting you better. Okay. And then lastly, I think that's the last piece is, if you want to obviously stay connected to where we are and understand what's going on, here's the website. But I really would love, for those that are listening right now, I've said a lot of things. I would love for you to just take a minute or two and think of any questions you might have along with the Academic Distress Committee. At this point, that ends my presentation.
David, I have a couple questions. The first one is in regards to the receiving of the information. How are we reaching out to maybe those families that don't feel welcomed at a school site, that don't want to come here, may have a language barrier, don't have the technology at home? So I guess the question is two-part. Where are we holding these information sessions? And for those demographics of people that I just spoke of, how are we getting their voice to the table?
Sure. Two great questions. Thank you. I'll start with the second one. We have a great partnership with El Centro. And El Centro has been a big part of connecting us not only to the families, but to the ways that we can continue to communicate with them, ensuring that there is someone to translate and interpret information and communicate to our families. The other piece is we are posting them through Erin and her office. She's been able to post them on social media websites and the such. We have meetings here. We're going to eventually have meetings at locations where our families feel comfortable going. Okay. We also know that is something that we heard pretty loud and clear, that not always, our families don't always want to come here, so we need to go to them. So part of that will be going to them.
Okay. My next question is in regards to the communication from central office to the building. Having lived on both sides of that in that realm,
Sure.
Sometimes it's not a communication issue as much as it is once the communication or the information is received, do the building leaders know what to do with it and how to implement it, whether it be a program, an initiative, et cetera. So have you taken a deep dive into that? Is it truly a communication issue, or are there some building leaders that just either for whatever reason are not following what is the information that's being given to them?
Sure. I think you asked the right first question. The first question was spot on. Is it a communication issue? That's what I have to find out, right? I think there's layers of communication and what that looks like and what that means to folks. I think part of it is, maybe they don't get the information necessary. I don't know. I will find out. Or it could be just the interpretation of the information, which is the second piece. So nonetheless, I think it is a broad, communication is so, you can drive a truck through the word, right? And so I think there's just a deeper analysis that needs to take place. I do think there is a disconnect in, and this is again from anecdotes from the surveys and from comments from individuals, there is a disconnect in what great support should look like.
Right.
And what school leaders need and how we're supporting that. And again, I need to get under the hood to really be able to give you a better answer, but I do think there is a disconnect somewhere along those lines.
Okay, because I was just asking because sometimes, and it goes back to what you said about the culture of trust, sometimes when you're given information and you're not necessarily sure what to do with it or how to lead your staff in the direction that they should be going, if you don't trust, you're afraid to say, I need a little bit more support. I need a little bit more help. I need a little bit more coaching because I don't feel that I can do this alone.
That's right.
And as an instructional leader,
That's right.
that's a hard pill to swallow because you're looked at as you should be able to do this.
That's right.
Sometimes you don't have the necessary competencies to do that. So,
I mean, you raise a great point. I mean, so and when that happens, we actually get to a space where instead of asking for that help, you kind of regress to the mean of what everyone else is doing.
Right.
Right. And so that's the temptation. So again, to your point, I think it's just a deeper analysis of what's going on before action is taking place.
Okay.
But I think you're spot on in your analysis.
okay.
Other questions? I wanted to ask Mr. Miller, in terms of compliance with House Bill 70 and what you're hearing tonight, do you feel like we're on track so far with the work and what you're hearing?
I do. It seems like the CEO and the commissioner are following the statutory timeline spot on. So I'm happy to hear all this progress with the community stakeholders piece, and everything seems to be going according to the timeline in statute.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, if there are no other questions from the commission itself, we can take some public comment, if there are other questions. Boy, this is unusual.
There's a football game tonight,
Well,
I think.
I know.
Let me get a mic.
Do you want to, yeah, I think you need, so people can hear you. That mic's on, yeah.
Jim Smith, school board member. I want to go back to something you said, Mr. Hardy, early on. When I get calls from parents, the number one complaint, the number one concern is they feel when they go into a building or when they're on a phone conversation, they are not welcomed. They do not feel they get the answers they want, and they do not feel that the atmosphere when they walk in a building is, hey, we're glad you're here. Walmart has a greeter. They have it for two reasons. Number one, to greet the customer and make them feel good. And number two, psychologically, they believe that the more eye-to-eye contact the greeter has with the person coming in the store, the less likely the person will walk out of the store with something they haven't paid for, better known as shoplifting. That's the two reasons for the greeter. I'm not saying we would need a greeter in a meeting, but the best way I know of making people feel comfortable is smiling. Hi, how are you today? What can I do to help you? Back numbers of years ago, I used to work for this district in adult ed, teaching 3 programs designed by the Ohio State University. One of those programs was how to make a positive first impression. And the basis of the program was from a book that was popular back in the 80s. And the author said, in reality, you have about 3 minutes to make a positive first impression. If you don't, it's almost impossible to get someone to change their mind and say, I was wrong about you, you really. So maybe one of the things you could look at doing is what a lot of businesses do. They train, educate their employees on how to make a positive first impression. Number 1 on the list of companies that does that is the Walt Disney Organization. They have a program called Disney University, and everyone that works at Disney goes to Disney U. And they have often said that they believe the most important person in the park at any given time is the group that goes around picking up trash. Not just because they keep the park beautiful, but because they get more questions on where things are than anyone else working in the park, because they're out there amongst the people. And they get those questions, and they all have to go to Disney U to make that positive impression. One of the companies I called on back in the 80s was Cedar Point. And Cedar Point has a motto, or they did then. They have a goal, and that is to make your day in the park the best day of your summer. And the gentleman went on to say, and we know that you can have positive impressions all day long, and on your way to the parking lot, you see one negative, all the positives are gone. That's what they remember. So maybe think about doing what a lot of private companies do, and get everyone, including people in the central office. One of Disney's rules back then was every executive in their executive office had to work 2 weeks in the park every year, selling hot dogs, running the roller coaster, out with the people, so they never forget. And I think a lot of times, and I think we have great people, but when you've been out of a classroom for a long time, you know what a lot of teachers told me they liked about you?
What's that?
You were the only finalist that had taught. And they want to know that there's someone that knows what it's like in the classroom. And so maybe at some point during the year, all of our administrators get a couple of days to go in and teach a class or something. But what you have learned in the survey confirms what I have heard over and over for the last 10 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other comment? All right, if not, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Can we do the roll call?
Mr. Coughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Monteleone,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Solis.
All right, well, go Titans, yeah? All right, thanks, everyone.
This has been a production of Lorain City Schools TV 20 WLCS.